Welcome back. It is the Jeff Santos Show. Again, it's our last show of the calendar year 2019. We'll be back more than likely January 6th, but we're going to leave open the second and third in case there's some breaking news going on. So there's nobody better that I'd like to end the year with than our next guest. He is, of course, the Renaissance man, a great musician. He is an activist trying to save places where a lot of musicians tend to perform at the Showbox Theater in Seattle. And, of course, you can see his writings at Daily Kos, Democracy Watch News, and, of course, right here, usually on Tuesdays, but we bring him back on a Friday. Mark, great to have you on our final show of the year. How are you, my man?
Well, we are in the studio, so we can play music.
All right.
Jamming. So that's my statement for the day. But it's good to be with you, Jeff. I actually am a little sleep deprived, but I do have my coffee here, which is rare. I don't normally drink coffee, but sometimes
you need it, man.
Precedent demands it. And no, I don't drink Starbucks coffee. It just
thankfully, good job. We don't need Mr. Schultz to make any more profits. Well, look, it's been.
Yeah, we don't need him for president either, by the way.
That too.
Just to give you
thankfully, I think he's given that up. We get enough billionaires in the race. Let me ask you. It's middle of the afternoon in Seattle. We talk to Mark usually at 5:30 Eastern, 2:30 Pacific time. So it's a Friday afternoon in Seattle. It's the city just looking to do their the regular shopping. Is it crazed in that regard? You don't live too far from downtown.
Well, the shopping has definitely picked up. What's nice is that there are actually, in this extent of town, a few sort of discount stores where people can go and get stuff at relatively decent prices. So cool. We don't have a Kmart or a Walmart or anything like that in downtown Seattle.
Excellent.
Nowhere really in the city that I know of. But yeah, there's people getting ready for Christmas. They have a tree lighting ceremony at Seattle Center, at Westlake Park, and so everything looks pretty downtown. Nordstrom's is decorated with lights and the big famous star. So people are getting ready for the holidays. But I think some of us are just a little bit exhausted from the political season. It's just been crazy as a journalist, especially trying to cover, Amazon trying to buy our election, an impeachment of a president, 20th anniversary events that went on for 2 weeks of the WTO protests here in Seattle. And then, a lot of other things have been going on. The one story that I think nobody is covering pretty much is the fact that the United States was ranked 48th in the world in terms of press freedom in 2019 by Reporters Without Borders. So that is something that, as an American journalist, I cannot be proud of, and I sort of have to speak out about it any opportunity, because I think it's our obligation, all publishers, editors, reporters, journalists in the United States, it's our obligation to speak up for freedom of the press. And that's a major part of democracy. It's something we talk a lot about at Democracy Watch News is, the importance of freedom of the press for a functioning democracy. You have to have it. And, having a guy in the White House who seems to hate the press more than he hates, I don't know. I mean, some of us here in Seattle kind of hate the Yankees. It's, no offense to people who live in New York, but, we have some sore memories.
Oh, yeah. Well, no, I mean, don't forget, you're talking to a station in Boston. We grew up hating the Yankees. I mean, I used to have a T-shirt as a kid said, I love New York, but hate the Yankees. So, that was the time when they were trying to,
I love New York, but I hate Yankees. And then there was one, I used to live in Boston. I don't know if you still hear that, but, I went to Boston and cod, but that's a different one.
Okay. That'll be a memory.
I think, I don't know if you've ever heard that one, Jeff, but apparently people could get T-shirts at one time saying that.
Yeah, no, but, that was the days of, love that dirty water, No, look, there's a lot of history there. I'm interested in how, as we look back at the year, there's so many things that have come around, the world in Seattle. I mean, you, of course, a couple of years ago, you were the folks that were trying to stop the Muslim ban But this year, you're very much Seattle was in the news, not only on those anniversaries. There were many other stories that came from there, and of course Jay Inslee's campaign on the environment, a number of big rallies for Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders. So there's a lot has gone on. I mean, if you look back on this year, what stands out to you?
Well, a story that just happened stands out in my mind after being on a conference call with our member of Congress, Pramila Jayapal. She voted against the new trade agreement with Mexico and Canada.
Excellent.
And that is kind of a shocker to a lot of people, I think, in the Democratic Party establishment, because...
One of 38 Democrats, by the way.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, she explained very clearly, she's a very intelligent woman, very well-spoken, and she explained very clearly, I know as of Monday night when we were on that conference call, she hadn't made up her mind. But in the meantime, she has spoken to most of the major environmental groups in Seattle, the labor unions, and they all convinced her, as her constituents, that their opinion is that it's not good enough. And even though it's better than the original proposal, it's not good enough.
Amen to that.
It does still outsources jobs, still harms environmental protection laws and labor laws. So she just said, thanks but no thanks. I'll pass this time and see you again next time or whatever, to try this in the future, on some other trade agreement to get it right. But, she just said that she didn't think it was good enough, that they didn't get it right. And I think my impression is just that she's good at listening to her constituents. I mean, she really is a populist, progressive sort of leader. And so she went back home and called her friends and said, what's up with this? What do y'all think? And I think she picked up on the prevailing attitude, at least in Seattle, which is a large part of her district, which is at those 20th anniversary events when Joseph Stiglitz was in town, Lori Wallach talking about trade agreements. This new agreement with Mexico and Canada was seen as just another part of the corporate globalization regimen that's been there for years, since, before 1999. And so people didn't trust it, and that was there was a workshop dedicated to that at Town Hall where they were just saying, no, it's another TPP, it's another way of outsourcing jobs and hurting the U.S. economy. So whatever Trump has to say about it is just not very good, not very good.
Well, I think one of the pieces here of the puzzle, and it was people like Barbara Lee, of course, who was mentioned last night in the debate for her war against the only person voting against the Afghanistan war, which of course gave carte blanche to George W. Bush, which he would later do, which would be going into Iraq on a lie. But there are a lot of progressive Democrats, and again, Sanders said last night he would vote against it in the Senate. This, to me, is an example of the Democrats not really thinking this through. They announced the same day they do this that they announced the articles of impeachment, not the actual impeachment vote itself. And I think that it gets, it to me is not the smart strategy. If you want to make it clear, and I'm glad the Democrats are going to hold back on not giving Mr. McConnell the baton, if you might, because I think it's time for Donald Trump to sweat a little, and Mitch McConnell and Moscow Mitch, or you want to call him, as well. And if the Democrats have any cojones, they play this thing, and maybe it forces Bolton, Mulvaney to come forward and spill more beans, and then who knows what happens. And even if it doesn't, I think it's a smart move by Nancy Pelosi, who has handled the impeachment piece well. I don't necessarily agree with her on some of the other issues, including this new NAFTA, as I call it. Do you think, in looking back at the year in music, have we made any strides in new music outside of your world in Seattle? It just seems that there's a ton of pop out there, a number of female artists, which is good, that have been there. But I mean, it's not exactly where I was thinking the other day, where you had this sharp edge of punk rock in the late 70s, and again the Nirvana, Seattle sound, Pearl Jam, Soundgarden in the late 80s and early 90s. Are we gonna see that at all?
Well, Jeff, it's always been an issue that the music industry has its own barriers, that are built up
Yeah.
Now we have this new world of online promotion and distribution, which is where almost all the musicians are going now. So it's a whole new world, and people are sort of making it up as they go along. Now, Macklemore was one of the first artists to basically own his own product when he first started. I mean, he distributed his own music, had his own producer, very independent kind of operation. And he was actually able to make a lot of money that way long before the major labels decided to distribute his stuff. So that's the world we're in. You kind of have to prove that you have an audience already, that you can produce, master, and release, and distribute, and promote your own music. So you have to wear all these hats now. And it makes it more difficult for a lot of bands and musicians. At the same time, it also opens a door for people who may not otherwise have been heard, who just end up, becoming really popular on YouTube or Instagram or something. So it's a double-edged sword, but I think that specifically in Seattle, which is where my focus is most of the time. I mean, I love to visit New York and LA and check out the music scene and what's going on in those places, San Francisco, Vancouver, DC. But really, I mean, Seattle is its own kind of bubble, and I think those of us who live here and perform music here and have bands, we're all about Seattle. I mean, yes, we go on tour and you go to other cities, but Seattle is the place where we spend most of our time, and that's a lot of us moved here for that reason. And I would say that Seattle has more talented musicians per capita than I've ever seen before. And what's coming out of this town is really impressive. Now, whether the major labels are going to pick up on it or not is something that I and nobody else can control. But I know NPR has did a write-up a few months ago about, the 5 new artists that are changing the face of the music scene in Seattle. And I think my friend Eva Walker's band, the Black Tones, Eva and Cedric, her brother, had this great band called the Black Tones that are getting a lot of attention. Their debut release was produced by the same guy who produced Nirvana's first album. And so I think, there's a buzz going on with that band. There's another band that I really love called BearAxe, BearAxe. And that's Shaina Shepherd. She's probably one of the best singers I've ever heard. She just has a voice that, she doesn't need a microphone or a page up. You can hear her blocks away.
Is it your talking to Mark Taylor-Canfield, the Renaissance man of the Jeff Santos Show, and do you sense that it's harder to make to make a record, to get the funding to do it than it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago?
No, exact opposite. And there's plenty of YouTube videos about this. People are building their own studios. Basically, in order to record an album these days, all you really need is a decent software recording program, which people refer to as DAWs. And some of those are freeware that you can download. Like, you can get Audacity for free online. There's a lot of
maybe it's the marketing piece that's a little bit harder.
There's where it comes in. So
okay. That's what I was trying to get to.
You can record your own album and master it and do a very professional job. You don't need the $1 million studios anymore. Okay, that's for certain. You can do a lot of it on your laptop. So the technology is amazing these days. The issue is that how much time do you have as an artist to spend promoting and distributing your own work? It's very labor intensive. You have to be really up on all the latest social networking platforms. You have to be really smart and constantly educate yourself about new marketing tools and new strategies for marketing online, because that's where all the action is now. Everybody is downloading the music. They're not necessarily buying your CDs anymore. So you have to learn the entire business sort of yourself. These are the things that managers and record labels used to take care of for you. Right. Now you sort of have to devote your entire life and all of your time to it if you really want to get your music out there. And so in that way, it can be tough. And, the days of I keep telling people, the days of the major label coming to Seattle and finding that, Nirvana sounded like a grunge band or whatever, and throwing hundreds of thousands of dollars at them so they can party their way through an album just doesn't happen anymore. Yeah. So a lot of artists fund themselves. They got a day job or some other way. They have Patreon is one way that a lot of bands get support from their audience. And in Seattle, there's plenty of places to play, so it's not an issue of not being able to play live.
Right.
That's never an issue. Getting your music out there is online. With online distribution is a big job. And there are some people, I mean, there's one guy named Ari Herstead that I really enjoy. He's worked with some great Grammy Award-winning musicians, and he's the only guy online. It's called Ari's Take. He's the only guy online I know who actually likes to share with, up-and-coming musicians all the tricks and inside stories about what's going on. And he does very honest reviews about a lot of products and services that musicians are targeted for, like the new software, the distribution networks and things. And he's very honest about which ones work and which ones don't, and what experiences he's had. He doesn't have a sponsor telling him what to write. So there are a few people out there who are trying to explain it to the new generation of musicians coming up. But most of us are just making it up as we go along, Jeff. I mean, because the market changes every day. The technology changes every day. What I think is interesting is that these great bands that are coming out of Seattle right now are playing this really interesting fusion of styles. And so in the same band, sometimes during the same song, you'll hear grunge, you'll hear hardcore punk, you'll hear blues, you'll hear jazz, all thrown in the same song. I mean, that's what's interesting to me, is that stylistically, a lot of my compatriots in the music scene here, we've been influenced by everything. Everyone listens, even the real young people just starting to discover music now are listening to Jimi Hendrix and classic rock and a lot of stuff that was hasn't been around in terms of the bands haven't even been around since long before they were born.
Right, exactly.
Internet and all this access to Spotify and all these different platforms. People are listening to. I have a friend who's really into hardcore punk, but then I caught him the other day listening to swing music on Spotify because he really likes it. It's like,
right.
And so people are really mixing it up, and it's creating a really interesting style where you don't get bored, believe me, because the styles are so interesting now that one coming out of Seattle. Some of it is a little retro where they're reaching back to their roots, which I think is really cool.
I love that. I love reaching back to the roots. Talking with Mark Taylor-Canfield, besides being a great investigative journalist as well as a journalist that goes into scrums, to say the least, thinking back to 2000 and all of the protests, WTO, and so forth. And of course, he's always writing on a lot of the issues, including the debate last night, which we'll get into before we leave. But one more question. I remember that a lot of the history of a band like U2, when they talked about in the United States, college radio made a major impact. The same thing with REM. Is it no longer because of Spotify and Pandora and all the other elements, all the other platforms, or does it still play a major role? I presume University of Washington and all the Seattle-based universities still have college radio stations, or is that no longer the case?
That's a really interesting question, Jeff. I'm not sure anybody's ever asked me that, but the major station for music in Seattle, which sets the tone for all of these bands, they have free shows all throughout the summer at the Mural Amphitheater outdoors, right into the Space Needle, and that's KEXP. It's actually a public radio station, although they have a huge budget, and it was founded by Paul Allen, the Microsoft billionaire. But it's a public station. My friend Eva with the Black Twins, she has her own show on it now called Audio Oasis, where she
this is a public station, but is it connected to a university?
No, it no longer is.
It was originally.
It was originally, and there was KCMU was associated with the University of Washington, but the University of Washington actually does not have a music station, as far as I know. They have KUOW, which is an NPR station, so it's pretty much NPR programming all day long.
Right.
Then KBCS, though, with Bellevue College, which is a place I spent at doing news, is a Pacifica station, and they are associated with Bellevue College, and they do have a full-on music program from morning, noon till night. A lot of diverse music on that station. You never know from one minute to the next. If you really love Brazilian music, then my friend Juliana is tuning into that. If you really love the blues or the Grateful Dead, there's a show on KBCS for you. They do not have one particular format like most commercial stations. It's more interesting. It's more like what I encountered in France, with some of their national broadcasting, which was, you'd hear a Michael Jackson song, and then you'd hear Duke Ellington, and then you'd hear, country and western, and then you'd hear a classical piece. They just kind of mixed it up, and that's how KBCS is. But no, it's less about the colleges, although the college radio stations still have a presence because of their online presence. So Green River Community College, in Tacoma, there are several really good local college stations, and it all does support local music. I mean, that's one good thing. With the local stations, they really do promote local bands. And if you're getting airplay on KEXP in Seattle, then you've pretty much made it. I mean, that's what gives you the spotlight for national recognition.
That is good to know. I just got about a minute left here. I want to just ask you quickly about, how young people are 52% or whatever are going to Bernie, and even Buttigieg, who last night got booted by Bernie Sanders, comparing him to Biden and urging Little Pete to go, my nickname for him, a little bit ahead to get Biden, who's got, I think, 41 billionaires to 39 for Buttigieg.
Yeah.
Your thoughts on that? Because young people just don't see, they see right through the BS that Buttigieg provides. And obviously they see the older guy in the race, and Sanders, who they like, who thinks about tomorrow and the future. Your final thoughts on that before we roll?
I think the issue is that the older folks that are in Joe Biden's generation don't seem to understand that the fact that there's so many billionaires involved in these elections, and there's so many running for office, that is sort of a bad sign in itself. They seem to think it's just business as usual, but this is unprecedented. I've never seen this before in U.S. politics, where billionaires run it. And, so there you go. The young people see it because they're not billionaires yet. Believe me, the college students, they haven't made their first billion. They're working on their second billion because they gave up on the first. That's where they're at. A lot of them don't even have jobs, or they're working minimum wage, so
exactly.
They get it.
Hey, Mark, so great to have you on twice this week. We'll look forward to doing a lot more in 2020. Hopefully one of these days get out to Seattle, too, and we'll do some broadcasting together. Thank you for all you do, and have a fantastic Christmas, a great holiday season, and, of course, best wishes for a new year, for all of us, really. Thank you, Mark.
Happy holidays, Jeff, to you and your family, and to all the folks listening out there. And, you can go to the MTC Report at YouTube and check out my videos. There's like over 400 there now. And we're doing podcasts every week at democracywatchnews.org. So we'll see you on the flip side in 2020.
Thank you, man. All the best. That's Mark Taylor-Canfield. This is Jeff Santos. Just a few seconds before we roll, folks, I want to thank Joey for producing this broadcast, and, of course, Tony Lopes and Mark Pacheco for giving me the platform to do this. We're going to spend a couple of weeks off. Again, we could be back as soon as the 2nd, but more likely the 6th. If you ever want to look at more information on the show, revolutionradionetwork.com. We're going to be doing a lot more in 2020 on that website, and hopefully adding more stations as well in the coming year. There's a lot to do, including some work maybe with Free Speech TV. You can go to fstv.org and find out more there. And we're going to be doing some stuff with our friends at Cable News as well going forward. So we're excited about the new year. We thank you for joining us every day, 3 to 6, Monday through Friday. And we ask you to keep fighting, folks. Have yourself a wonderful, happy holiday Christmas, holiday season, and best wishes to you and your families for a great new year, and make it be a progressive one in 2020. My name is Jeff Santos. Right now, I got to say, I got to go.
Listening to the voice of Southeastern Massachusetts for news, sports, and talk. AM 1530 WVBF and FM 2599DD 99.7 Middleborough, Taunton.
USA Radio News with Tim Berg.
Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi has invited President Trump to deliver the State of the Union address Tuesday, February 4th. Pelosi extended the invitation in a letter to the president on Friday. The invitation comes days after the House impeached the president on charges of abuse of power and obstruction of justice. This is USA Radio News. AAA says nearly 116 million Americans will be traveling between December 21st and New Year's Day. That's roughly a 4% increase over the last year, and AAA spokesman Robert Sinclair says a lot of travelers will be dealing with headaches this holiday season.
We are anticipating more than 800,000 breakdowns among AAA members for the holiday travel period, with flat tires, dead batteries, and folks locking themselves out of their vehicles as the top 3 reasons.
Sinclair, speaking there on NBC News, also says that the worst time to travel is the day after Christmas, mid to late afternoon. Pasadena, California is gearing up for the Rose Bowl game and the Tournament of Roses parade on New Year's Day.